Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
Helping organizations figure out, your employees are using AI for their work, like whether you like it or not, like how do you put the right guardrails around that with governance and training to make it work out for everybody.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Hey folks, welcome back to Convergence.fm. My guest today is John Rood, who's the founder of Perceptual. He's also the author of the book Beyond the Exit and a long-time entrepreneur. He's built, scaled, and sold a business while staying very intentional all the while about what comes next. John started his career in consulting and realized he wasn't quite built to be an employee, and then launched a test preparation company. And he grew that from a solo operation into a multi-million-dollar business with hundreds of employees, and eventually sold the business to private equity. Since then, he's taught his kids at home during COVID. He wrote this book, Beyond the Exit, about what founders really face after an exit, and now leads Perceptual, where they help enterprises harness AI safely through navigating AI governance as well as training. On the episode, we cover the lessons he had to learn the hard way, like knowing when to get out of his team's way, the trade-offs between hiring specialists and generalists, and that founder discomfort that comes with delegating your way out of the familiar work into the unknown. We talk about switching from a services to a product business, why the discipline of Gino Wickman's EOS framework was a game changer for his company, and how he's applied that same discipline in research and discovery, whether it's testing markets with Google Ads or interviewing over 70 founders for his book, Beyond the Exit. We also explore his philosophy around feedback being a gift, why peer groups like EO and YPO can accelerate your personal and professional growth, and what it really means to design a life after work. And I don't think it's just for founders, but all of us as AI reshapes our industries and our careers. And finally, he shares how enterprises can embrace AI safely without slowing down by essentially putting the right guardrails and governance in place. Whether you're a business owner, a startup founder, or a technology leader, I think you'll find a ton of useful nuggets in this conversation about scaling smarter, planning further, and while staying human all the while during the journey. Here is my conversation with John Rood. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Thank you so much for making the time. There's a range of topics that I'm excited to cover with you. And the place that I want to start is talking about Next Step and how you got started on it, and then also different pieces of how you were able to grow. So how did that come about as a company?
Yeah, sure. So I had worked for one of my competitors in that industry previously for a very short time, just like a frontline instructor. I wasn't, an executive or anything. And the thing that every single person realizes in that industry is you see how much they're paying you, and then you see how much they're charging the students, and you realize, well, I could just do this and take that money and run with it. So everyone sees that, everyone tries to do it, and some people are successful, and we were just one of the ones that that was successful. So that business started off doing tutoring for graduate level entrance exams like the law school admissions test, the medical college admissions test, and a couple others. Ultimately graduated to focusing on our pre-medical vertical, where ultimately we developed a bunch of software, online courses, both live and asynchronous, practice test software, kind of like a full publications, like actual like print books. So we ultimately work on kind of like a full line provider for one of our verticals.
So I think there's a couple of trade-offs I imagine you probably went through as you were branching off, and instead of doing it for someone else, doing it for yourself, personally, financially, maybe on the family side, and maybe even with the existing company. So tell us about what that was like for you with respect to taking that leap and going out on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in some ways like too young to know what a big risk it was. I remember I quit my job in consulting in 2008, like right in the middle of the financial crisis. And I remember like I went to like a party like the day after I quit, and like some girl who was like in finance or something was like, oh God, I can't believe you quit. Have you seen the economy and whatever? I was like, I didn't think about the economy at all. Like that was not a consideration. Um, it was kind of like a good time in life to take a risk. Like this was before I had kids, rent was reasonable. And I think one of the things that was like basically just lucky is I picked an industry where the cash conversion cycle was really good. So in that industry and the test prep and tutoring industry, you get paid up front. So you book a student, they pay you, and then you deliver the service over the course of many weeks or months. So industries where you get paid up front as opposed to where you get, you do the thing and get paid, net 30, net 60, turns out to be a lot easier. And so when I talk to like student groups, like college entrepreneurship groups, which I love to do, I always talk about that because if you figure out a way to be an industry where you're getting paid up front and where you're getting paid by your customers to do the development, do the fulfillment, as opposed to having to go and capture it in arrears, like that is a much easier first time business for someone with no capital and like not a lot of expertise, which was what I was.
Man, on the one hand, I wish we had met before I started Integral, because we were generally at least net 30, if not net 60.
Yeah.
And most of the fundraising I had to do, or kind of leveraging and mortgaging things that I owned in order to pay for stuff, was because our clients didn't pay us for like 90 days, but I had to make payroll every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that was a big limiter. And then in some cases, there was a big distraction to go chase after folks who weren't paying as well. We were mostly lucky, but the amount of effort that takes and what it can do to the relationships with your clients and everyone else is also really challenging. So wish I had that advice. On the other hand, you mentioned you were maybe too young, and, I don't think we necessarily give naivete enough credit for getting off of the stool and their analysis paralysis and getting into things. And so you were definitely we don't give that enough credit. And I'm curious, one of the challenges that we face certainly, and I notice a lot of our clients face, is whittling down our target market. Mm-hmm. And it's product management 101 of, go after the smallest viable audience. But in practice, it's really hard, especially when you're running your own business, of you're getting this cash flow from various sources, in your case, teaching various things. And then you kind of planted your flag, it sounds like, with one specific area around pre-med. Mm-hmm. What was that decision-making like intellectually as well as maybe emotionally for you?
So that was definitely a turning point in our company. And it was like a confluence of luck and testing, I would say. So, we had started off in the law school admissions test vertical because that's what I knew how to do. And I knew how to teach it. And so we were able to kind of get revenue right off the bat. And then we're trying to test a bunch of different things, test a bunch of different markets and see what was competitive. And honestly, the way that we ended up in the pre-med market was I made a landing page. I turned on Google Ads to it, and then we started getting calls right away. And that had never happened. We never had that volume of inbound before. And I remember the day that I did it, I was visiting my buddy in Seattle. We were watching TV, and I just had my laptop and just click go on Google Ads. And then 5 minutes later, I see our sales call line light up. And then 10 minutes after that, it happens again. And that and so that was, I didn't know that would happen. I knew enough to know to test that market. But that was not we didn't commission a McKinsey study to say that was the best market. It was we're going to go try these 5 different things and probably one of them will work. And it's funny now, now I run another early stage company and we're at the same place where I know we're in the right market. I know ultimately, one of the things that we're selling is going to catch on, but I don't know which one. But I feel much more comfortable that that's part of the process now.
And what time frame was that where you did the Google Ads test?
That was, the company started in 2010, and I think it was 2012 ultimately that we did it. So I think my first year, 2010, I think the company earned like 70 or $80,000, and I think I earned like 35. And then the next year, I think I earned like 200K, and then the next year was like basically double. Like we doubled every year for a number of years. So it was like a kind of like a fine business, but there's only so long you want to run like a 500K business. Like my ambitions were higher than that. And so that's when we were able to kind of get some amount of scale after that.
And so before we get to talking about the scale, which I certainly want to, if you were to run a similar test, and it sounds like you are already with the new venture that you're doing, does the Google plus landing page still work, or does that look a little different for the world it is today with AI and everything else, and maybe the Google space being a little bit more saturated?
I mean, personally, I still think that it works. Like, I think if you're trying to figure out, I mean, it's a little different now because right now I'm in a B2B business and as opposed to direct to consumer business. I think in a direct to consumer business, like it's very easy to run those tests. Particularly, I mean, Google ads, sure. I mean, it's expensive, but like it works it's expensive for a reason. Things like Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and direct to consumer, I think are really efficient. On the B2B side, I think it's much less efficient, but really, I mean, the way that our business that we're in now got our start was exactly that same way. Like we identified a problem. We knew exactly how to fix it. We're able to communicate that well. And then it's just a question of getting the inbound traffic. And the easiest way to do that in my experience is still just ads.
Awesome. And you bring up a good point around it being different between B2B and B2C. Any lessons you may want to share about how to do that differently for the B2B space?
No. So the answer to your question is no. And the reason that my answer is no is I'm just totally just learning there. And, it's funny, like a few weeks ago, I was thinking about this. Is like, I'm running a B2B business and I'm having a great time, but, it's not where I come from. Like, it's not like I don't know how to do this as well. So I'm like spending time like Googling, like B2B sales, like give me some tips, like that kind of thing. And so I think if my goal at this point in life was to make a lot more money, what I would do is I would run a direct-to-consumer education business, and I would just do exactly the same thing as I had been before. But that's not my goal now. Like, I'm more interested in learning and growing and like enjoying what I'm doing. So that's why I'm doing something that's different, where my speed of learning is much higher, but then my ability to deliver succinct tips on B2B sales on a podcast is much lower at this point.
Fair enough. So you mentioned scaling beyond a 500K business. And so I'd love to know what sort of constraints were there at the time. Was it just purely financial or others around why you wanted to scale beyond that? And then what some of the aspects were that were really critical to being able to scale after?
Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't grow up wanting to be like an entrepreneur. Like my parents were not business owners or whatever. And I think like the world was a little different actually in like 2010, 2011 in terms of like the culture. Like now I think like you see so many people like raising like $1 billion for their AI startup or whatever. Like it just feels a little different to run a small like lifestyle sized business. But even then at the time, like I knew I wanted to keep growing because I think that growth is fun. And I don't even know if it was about like, I want more money to like spend on stuff, but like you want your business to grow. And so ultimately what happened was, kind of in the way I'd already described, we just found product market fit. Like we didn't start knowing what market we needed to be in. We figured that out through testing. And then ultimately we're able to kind of get, the executives and the development money and all the stuff once we were able to figure out what market we were supposed to be in.
You mentioned product market fit, and I'm going to guess that back when you found it, that term wasn't quite as prevalent as it is now. And I'm curious what it felt like at the time, and if you kind of had this theory or if it was other kind of more fundamentals that you were applying that said, hey, I think we've figured something out and it's time to kind of add more fuel to this.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that you like read about in like startup media is that when you find it, like you know it, like it's not a secret. And that's exactly what my experience was. So before we knew what market we needed to be in and what kind and like how to sell to that market, we were getting and again, this was like a high dollar services business. We were probably getting like 2 or 3 or 4 inquiries a day. And then when we figured out the market we needed to be in, we're getting 15, 20, 25 inquiries per day. And of course, like we're running paid media, so we're paying for those. But that was like a substantial difference. And I don't know if that's the same in other industries. Like now that I run a B2B business, like I don't expect that I'll just like find the right knob and we'll get like 1,000 inquiries. I think it goes slower than that. But in the consumer world, like that's it. Like if you understand what you should be selling and who you're selling it to, and you're able to articulate their problems and then get your media in front of them, like that's quite scalable.
So I love that you were able to compare and contrast, one versus the other of it was 2 to 4 and then went to 15 to 25 based on a lever that you moved. And also that, hey, it was okay to pay for it because as much as that was an investment, the cost of information was probably very low compared to other ways that you could find out where to kind of double down and go next. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's a really important takeaway. In terms of what scaling looked like after you found that, I figured you'd have to get some systems and processes in place because you were hiring more people. There's maybe some technology investments. So talk to us about what happened after you kind of found that product market fit.
Yeah. So after we found product market fit, like it's like before that was like just like me like running this little business by myself. And then ultimately we grew to, I think we had 20 full-time kind of like management staff. And then it's an education business. So we had about 150 or 160 instructors. And so it's like, there's like a line there where it's like going from just a thing that I do to like running an actual business. And again, like no one really taught me any of this stuff. I'm sure it was like around, like I could have got an MBA or something, but like I didn't have that expertise at all. And so I think like one of the critical learnings was I had to get out of my own head that I was the best person in the world to do a bunch of this stuff. And now that I've kind of learned that and know many more entrepreneurs than I did 15 years ago, I know that's a very common problem, right? So, and it's, if you've read like the E-Myth, like that's what that book is about. That's one of the best books on building a business I think I've ever read. But the idea that, you are like a magic special person is just like not true. And every entrepreneur I think has to get over that hill.
And tell us just a little bit more about E-Myth for folks who are not familiar with the book.
Yeah, so E-Myth is an old business book. It's funny. It's like written in like a very old style. Like it feels like it's from the 1930s, although I think it's a little more recent. And fundamentally, it's where that language of working on your business or as opposed to in your business comes from. And that's probably self-explanatory, but if you're new to that concept, like definitely read this book.
And I think the other pieces in there were kind of the different hats that we have to wear as founders. In terms of, I think it was like the owner hat, the operator hat, and then the doer hat, as well as the systems piece of how that really helps unblock things. So what were some of the systems that you put in place to enable this growth?
So the number one system to put in place is just hiring really good people. Again, like I'd started my business when I was 26, maybe, and I never managed anyone before. So I'd worked in consulting and I was the low level consultant before that. So I had to learn how to manage, which was, I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes, during that process, but ultimately it's about, when you're trying to scale systems, it's about finding people who have done that exact thing before. And so my rule for hiring, after, a couple mistakes, I think is, I want to find someone who has done exactly the thing that I want them to do, but they've made it at least 3 times bigger previously, right? So if I need someone to, scale my sales from 1 million to 10 million, like I need to find someone who's done that a bunch of times, but like knows how to get to like 20, 30 million. And then I just need to be able to go recruit them, right? And so, that's kind of like easier said than done. Like getting someone to join, a really small business takes a lot of effort and persistence and some charisma. But that's ultimately how you get great people. Like you don't get great people by getting like people like right out of college that you have to figure out how to train them. Like you get great people in those kinds of like systems roles by just like going to places where they've done it before.
And I think this is a mistake I've made too. I feel like we may have some unique abilities to learn stuff quickly and grow faster than the norm that maybe gave us the confidence in the first place to span out compared to our peers and do this on our own. And the risk there is that we think that can be applied to everybody else and that growth rate. And that it may be a safer approach, like you said, to go find someone who's already done it in terms of scaling that revenue from 10 million to 20 million. I'm curious there in terms of sort of industry relevance or other constraints. It's easy to kind of want to find someone who has done the 10 to 20 million in the ed tech space and is local to your market. And you might be kind of making that person more of a unicorn to find than they need to be. What were some things that were maybe non-negotiables, and which ones did you find okay to sort of place a bet on?
So this was like 2012, 2013. And so the thing that we became negotiable on was just location. And so we were a totally remote company at a time when that was relatively unusual. Like now, like half the companies are totally remote. But I just gave up trying to hire in our local market. And I'm in Chicago, so it's not like small town Alaska or whatever. Like there's smart people here. But just ultimately decided that if I can get people with experience and talent and industry relevance, but they live somewhere else, that's who we would get. And now it sounds so like it's like almost like dumb to say it because it's just so obvious, but it was not as obvious in 2012.
And convincing folks to leave maybe more security to come be part of something that carried like more uncertainty is one of the things working against you. What were some of the things that were working for you, or what kind of helped along the way that you'd want to bring to the next time you may have to do it, or giving advice to someone else who's doing it?
Yeah, so my best ever hire was my first sales manager who I hired, who at her other role where we hired her away from was making $111,000 plus a little teeny tiny bonus. And she told me that later, like many years later. And our offer to her was, I think, $40,000 plus a really substantial commission. So she took a big risk, and ultimately it worked out. Like her compensation was like in the later years of our business after we had grown, it was much higher, and she got substantial money when we exited. So that worked out great for her, but it was a risk. And the way that I think you make that risk work for people, probably you're not going to be able to get most people to take a 60% pay cut. But I think if you are a small business, if you are a startup, you have to figure out ways to get people to take a 10, 20, 30% pay cut to come join your team. And the ways that you do that, I mean, number one, equity is the dollar thing, but in a small business, I get if you're a Silicon Valley type, yeah, you get some equity. In a small business, that's not nearly so common. But I think the things that people value are, number one, coming to play for the winning team is a big thing. People want to be where there is growth and where there is success. So if you can kind of tell people that story, and particularly in our industry, it's a small industry. There were not that many players, and so people knew who we were. They knew that we were growing. They knew that they were on the losing team and we were on the winning team. And you want to go play for the winning team. That's a big human motivation.
Awesome. And then that is a significant pay cut there. And if you had to guess in that case, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but what does your hunch tell you how she may have justified that to herself, or spoken to a friend or a spouse or a parent about taking such a big risk and why it made sense?
Yeah, we talked about it a lot. I think that she was just kind of I don't want to say stuck, because she would have eventually gotten promoted again, but was kind of getting to the top of where it's easy to go in a very large company before you're waiting for a VP to leave or die or something to get your promotion. And part of the story that you can tell in a small business is that that there's functionally no limit as to the amount of responsibility and compensation and learning that people can get if the company continues to grow, right? And then ultimately that played out, right? She ultimately ran a large team, ultimately went through an exit to private equity, ultimately, had financial rewards tied to that. So that worked out, I think, really well.
Sales is an obvious hire on something you're doing with your time. When it comes to, and then, maybe the back office and operations and someone taking care of all the non-differentiating paperworky kind of things is another hire that can free your time up. And for me, I found that the stuff in the middle, the operations and delivery and the real value add piece was really hard for me to compartmentalize what I was really doing versus what could be replicated by other folks. And it took me a few iterations to get to what made sense at Integral. And I'm curious, in your case, how did you arrive at that?
So one of the tools that I had used, which we got from the book Traction, is called Delegate and Elevate. And it's a really simple drill. It's just making this 2x2 matrix of things that you are good at and things that you like to do, right? And so, ultimately you're trying to get to the place with your time as an entrepreneur and as a leader where you're doing things that you enjoy and that you're really good at, and then you are thoughtfully and systematically identifying the other things in life that you are not good at or you don't like to do, and you're finding other people to do it. And so one of the things that I learned, and this is one of the things that now I know, and I just didn't know it when I was 25, is that people are wired completely differently. And I think when I was 25, I didn't understand how people worked nearly as well. And you think like, okay, well, having to call this list of parents and tell them that, they have to like make a payment, and, hear their complaints or like talk to them for a long time. Like, that's the thing I don't like. So that must mean no one likes it. So that's like awful. Like that must be like cleaning the toilets. But that wasn't the case, right? There's people that actually like to do that work, and you can go find the people to do that work. So I think like in that, intermediate operations layer, it's just possible to go find the people that like to do any of that stuff and put them in that role where they're going to thrive.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product design or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. Why the braids? Maybe they look cute, but really, it's because I'm finally getting a haircut. I'm donating this hair to Crowns of Courage, an incredible group that makes wigs for kids going through cancer. I know how much hair can be such a big part of making someone feel confident and more like themselves. And this is a way that we can help a child feel like that, especially during such a hard time. On top of that, I'm also matching donations to the Children's Foundation here in Michigan. The foundation funds health and wellness programs for kids in underserved communities, and I've gotten to see firsthand how thoughtful and impactful their work is. This is where you folks in my community can help. If you donate, whether it's a 20, 50, whatever feels right, I'm going to match it. So your gift is going to go twice as far. Whether it's because cancer has touched your life or you find meaning in helping kids feel whole again, here's an opportunity to double that impact. Thank you so much for your support here. And I think it's worth zooming out just a little bit and talking about Traction and EOS, because I find it's a conversation I have with my peers pretty often. And I find myself pretty surprised that folks have grown to like over 200 people and have been around for like over 5-10 years and haven't quite converged on any kind of operating system that the entire company is familiar with and running on with that's explicit. Of course, like you're not going to get to that size without at least an implicit assumed operating system, right? And I think I got very lucky myself that I was introduced to Traction by someone that gave me a lot of advice. And at the time, we were a very systems, processes, frameworks-based company, and it's not uncommon for a consultancy to be that way. And I was almost kind of writing our own playbook for how we take this kind of extreme programming, product thinking playbook and expand it out to how we run our entire business. And I hindsight's 2020, and it's easy to say. I probably would have wasted a bunch of cycles inventing a company operating system that wasn't my passion, and I almost got to kind of delegate and elevate to EOS and the book traction. On an aside, I think my summary of it might be that, like, hey, this guy Gino Wickman went out and read all the best business books that are worth reading, and also the ones that are not worth reading, and whittled down the really important takeaways into a framework, and then stress tested and fine-tuned that framework by running it at a number of businesses, including his own family business, I believe, and then kind of gave that to the world as a book. And then it's also scaled to a point where you can hire a consultant to come in and, we went through the process of self-implementing and realized, hey, again, I don't want to get a Boy Scout badge for being a really good implementer. I want to be good at some other stuff. So let's bring in someone and help us with going through the various kind of tenets of EOS. I happen to be lucky that, being in Michigan, I'm within kind of Gino Wickman's circle. And every once in a while, he'll text me a book that he thinks is relevant to some of our conversations. And it's kind of insane how much he really consumes. So that's kind of my high level sort of pitch to founders out there, certainly CEOs who've gotten to a certain level of size. And then to some extent, we were able to even do it within kind of subgroups or departments of the enterprise where, a senior manager or VP believes in it. And even if the broader company they work at doesn't want to make the investment, they implement a lot of the tenets themselves. So that's kind of my advice to folks out there, to at least read the book. I'm curious kind of what your take is on the overall operating system in itself.
So I loved it. And I did self-implement, but the secret that I found was you just have to do it exactly like the book says. And then you can make changes like later on, but it's like, if you try to do a piecemeal by yourself, I think it doesn't really work. Honestly, the big value of an implementer, and I've known a lot of implementers. I've helped friends put in traction, so I've been around that world a lot. And I think a big part of what implementers do is just like convince you to not ignore parts of the system that like you don't like just kind of want to do. Like they make you do it all, right? So I think if you're self-implementing, you just have to do it all. And we thought it was enormously valuable. Like I don't think we would have gotten to where we were if we didn't have it. I think what's valuable about it is that it points the entire company to the same set of metrics and goals, and then also has an accountability system. And now that I've seen inside many more businesses, I mean, I've seen like large, significant business, like private equity backed businesses that don't actually have like much of a system of goals. And that stuff goes like, if you're just like growing, like you just have like a good product and it's going well, like that's fine. But when it kind of gets to be harder and gets to be like more like wartime, like being able to point your people in the right direction, the same direction, like is really, really valuable. So it was very impactful for our business.
And I think there's also a discipline aspect of it that is hard for any individual to do, let alone for as a founder to kind of get everyone else to kind of be disciplined towards working consistently on a drumbeat on the same system. And having a book to read, I think there's even like simplified versions of Traction called like What the Heck is EOS or something.
Yeah.
Just gives
I read that one
every
too.
single person from the front lines all the way up to even we taught our advisory board how this kind of all works. So we weren't worrying too much about how the baton exchange worked because we delegated that to this operating system and we could focus on just running the fastest and winning the races. Not to make this a like EOS episode, but another thing that I've enjoyed a lot on a personal standpoint is the latest book that he's written called Shine, as well as 10 Disciplines, which has kind of helped me bring a lot of that benefit of like long-term thinking, whittled all the way down to like, how do I live my days with more discipline and consistency, and ultimately just getting a lot more feeling of progress towards what I really want to do versus, what we're kind of trained to do over time. And I really enjoyed reading your book, Beyond the Exit, because it had a ton of research, which kudos to you for, instead of taking like meandering on your own anecdotes to validate your hunches, I think more than 50, 70 other founders who are fairly unique, quirky weirdos that we don't necessarily get to hear about the founders, other than, the Elon Musk and the Steve Jobs book and stuff. And I think there's a lot more personal stories in yours. And I'm curious, how did that come about?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It was a fun journey. I had left my business after we'd sold it and after I'd worked there for a while, and I needed something to do. Like, it was clear that I was not going to like retire and not work again at 36 or however old I was at the time. So I needed to figure out what to do, but didn't really have any sort of like process for how to figure that out. And I think one thing I will give myself credit for is I think I intuited that it would be a mistake to simply say like, well, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm just going to like start another business and go as hard as I can, and then sell that one and do it again and do that until I have a heart attack and die. Like, that was not going to be the right life plan for me. Um, but there wasn't just like, there was not a lot of discussion. There's not a lot of like places where like post exit founders would talk. And now that there's actually more now than there was when I started the project 3 years ago, which I think is great. This was the book that I needed when I sold my business. Like straight up, like I wrote this because this is what I needed to learn. And the way that I learn is like, I just go talk to other smart people. So that's what I did. So I interviewed 70 other entrepreneurs that had a significant exit. I learned about what they did after they sold their business, really focused on how they found like meaning and purpose in the rest of their life, and very unfocused, like very not focused on like their money or what they do with their money or whatever, because I don't really care about that very much.
And was it easy getting in front of these 70 folks? Like, I'm sure there was a whole bunch of folks trying to sell them insurance that now
Yeah.
that, they were on PitchBook or whatever. And so what was that all like?
Um, Almost everyone I interviewed was just a warm intro from someone I knew. So I started with my EO network, so Entrepreneurs Organization. I'd been a member of that here in Chicago for many years, which I also really credit EO to my success as an aside. So I just like emailed a bunch of people I knew from EO who had exits, said, hey, can I interview you? And we did interviews with them. And I said, hey, can you introduce me to 2 other people that have had exits? So a huge amount of the people in the book are EO folks, but then they would start to introduce me to people like outside that circle as well. And so I think that ultimately, we talked to people with exits from like $1 or $2 million on the low end to $750 million on the high end. Basically every industry, but the vast majority of folks that I talked to were like Main Street, kind of like normie style businesses. Almost no one was like a Silicon Valley, TechCrunch, like big on Twitter type person. Like, they were just like EO style, EO size companies and exits.
Cool. I think there's something pretty key to highlight here as well. Also on the product side, where we have ideas and hunches on who might kind of want to consume and buy this new product that we're trying to put out. And I have oftentimes had to coach people into doing exactly what you did around trying to see, within your arm's reach of your existing customers or your network, who are the folks that might have this problem, identify the problem, and then want the solution. And then start with a few phone calls. And oftentimes that builds into kind of a flywheel where once you start to earn some trust and credibility, folks are very happy to introduce you into more people in their network. And then the next thing you know, you probably have more people than you set out to need. In your case with, there's a minimum effective dose probably of where the ideas started to converge, and you can predict what the next person's about to say. And it's very much the same thing with respect to product testing and speaking to individuals, and a lot easier to do than think about. And it's usually just finding the first 5 phone calls that you want to make, and then going from there with, I'm sure, some iterations or feedback loops when you're reflecting on who you want to speak more to or less to, and so forth. You did mention EO in there. Mm-hmm. And so I think I benefited a lot from being in Vistage originally and then in YPO. And I got super lucky that in like the first week or 2 of when I decided I was going to quit my job and go out on my own, my father has a friend who is part of a CEO peer group in Australia. And I had a call with him for kind of general, like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Give me generic CEO advice. And I don't remember any of what he said. It was probably just, thankfully, a bunch of encouragement. And the one takeaway was like, hey, go find a CEO organization.
Yeah.
So when I started getting approached by folks like Vistage and EO, I was already sold on the concept by someone I really trusted and respected. And it was a matter of choosing which one worked for me. So let's talk a little bit about how, I think whether you're a founder or CEO and you find one of those organizations, or you're a senior executive at a larger business, that there's a huge benefit in peer groups. And especially, it seems like a huge investment, not in money, not just in money, but also you're spending 1 or 2 days away from all the chaos that you have to be and the firefighting you have to put out. And maybe it goes back to the e-myth of working on the business, but how did you decide to do EO, and what's advice you have about peer groups for folks?
So right after I got out of graduate school, I lived here in Chicago, and so I just needed like a job. And so I got a job with a guy named Russ, basically as a secretary. Like I think I had a slightly fancier title as basically a secretary. And Russ ran a pretty significant business in the legal staffing world. And he's in my book, actually. He was one of my first interviews for my book, and he's on the last page. And so I worked for him, and he was an EO. And there was like a mystique about it a little bit, because he was like, I'm going to go I go to this meeting every month, and I can't miss it, and I can't be late. Like once we had it at his house, and I had to like set out the cheese and crackers and stuff. And then he's like, get out of here. Like, this is really private. So I was like, okay, like I knew that was like a thing that I should consider. So, ultimately when I had my business, I think it was 4 years into my business when I joined EO. And as you said, like I thought it was expensive at the time. Like it was like, probably all in, probably $12,000 a year that we spent on that. And now I know that that's just like nothing. Like that's just like a drop in the bucket for the value that I got out of it. EO is where I learned about traction. EO is where I learned about how to manage people. EO is where you start to see, and you'd mentioned this when we were talking about the book interviews, like you start to see the same patterns over and over and over and over. And I learned that, businesses kind of like all taste like chicken, like whether you are B2B, B2C, like you're in construction, you're in software, like whatever, like fundamentally business for most executives, most entrepreneurs is like, you go to your office and you have some meetings and you type some emails, and like, that's kind of it. And so the same problems happen with your emails and your meetings and your hirings and whatever. So that was like just totally invaluable to be able to see that.
I know we've talked about patterns, and so I'm curious, are there any other patterns or maybe like mental models that you've learned along the way by doing it yourself or from your peers and writing the book that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about so far?
Yeah. So one of them that I use all the time, and I just heard it kind of around the EO ecosystem, is this idea that feedback is a gift. And I think as an early manager, it's really hard to give feedback. And especially as a young entrepreneur where you're oftentimes hiring people that are older and more experienced than you, and then you have to go tell them like what they're doing wrong. That was absolutely critical to me. And I think like in my early days of management, I wasn't good at that. And now I'm really good at that, right? So anyone who I'm working with just has the expectation that they're going to hear my opinions a lot. They're going to hear those opinions not because like I'm trying to be critical or because they're not good at this, but because everyone's trying to get held to a higher standard. And ultimately the entrepreneur is who drives the standard in the organization. So that's definitely a big one that I took away from EO.
And I think, the gift part, I initially, when I heard that, didn't really go beyond the surface. And I think, as I think about it now, if you think about a gift, it's wrapped up and, there's some level of kindness and delight in there. It's specific to the person you're handing it to. It's in the lens of a broader vision that you've already discussed in your domain. And hopefully it's also pretty actionable. So the other person has a pretty good sense of what kind of change needs to be applied that comes out of it. And it's uncomfortable, certainly. And I'm curious, over the years of kind of going from discomfort to now, it seems like you're pretty comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you might have learned around kind of giving and receiving feedback?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that the key to giving feedback is doing it really continually. Like, I think that the biggest mistake that some managers make, and I see people that are kind of like in middle management make this mistake a lot of thinking that the time to give feedback is like at the annual review or at, the quarterly, mini review or whatever. But the time to give feedback is like literally all the time, continually. Like, if you see something that you don't like, as the entrepreneur, like, you just have to fix it. Like, you just have to tell people like right away. And I think when you do that, number one, things get fixed and things like operate better because you've given better feedback. But number two, I think that you build trust with your team, because everyone, if you think about, your time at the beginning of your career, beginning of my career when I was an employee, you're an employee, you're always like, oh, what does the boss think? Like, what's the boss think of me? Like, they say like 3 words that they're just like say some random thing that they don't care about. And you're like, ooh, what did that mean? And so the way that you get in good with your team and make them feel comfortable is convincing them that if they're doing something that you don't like or that you think is wrong or can be improved, that they're going to hear about it right away. And then if they don't hear that from you, then they think that they're doing the right thing. And of course, the other side of that is like giving lots of praise, lots of thank yous, lots of good jobs reinforces that too. But just like avoiding that kind of like messy middle where people don't know if they're like giving you the right output or not, like that's what you want to try to avoid.
And I think you mentioned this already in terms of people being wired differently. And what I've learned over time is that people like receiving feedback differently. Almost everyone likes receiving feedback. It's usually in that kind of medium. And whether it's for hiring or for feedback, are there any other tools that you use along the way to help you discern kind of people's wiring?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I realized about myself is, I've got a certain way that I like to work. I've got a certain way that I like to communicate, to talk to people, to give feedback. And that's particular to me. And so it's not like, oh, John does a good job of that or a bad job. It's just kind of how I am. So one of the tools that I use now a lot is I just kind of wrote out like a 1-pager on what it's like to work with me, like what my expectations are, what people like about working with me, what people don't like about working with me. And I'll give it to people if they're like in the final stages of like an executive level position for me. And I think that really helps filter people out, right? Because some people are like their boss doing a certain thing and some people don't. And so if someone's going to come work for me and they prefer direct and consistent feedback, we'll be successful on that. But if someone comes to work with me and they prefer like huge amounts of like constant, like positive feedback only, which I think is in some ways kind of like a generational thing as well, we're not going to be as successful. So I want to set those expectations up front and let people know like, hey, we're all spiky, right? We all have some things that we're great at, some things that we're bad at. Here's how I am. And that's either going to work for us or it's not. So let's figure that out up front.
And you mentioned generationally there, and I want to kind of go beyond the surface a little bit because I think we come across owners, founders, executives that are different generation from the staff that's coming in. And I think feedback is one of those intergenerational kind of conflicts that comes into play. And the really good folks have kind of figured out that, hey, yeah, maybe younger generation requires like, the way I talk about it is like the poop sandwich and like having like the critical feedback between the 2 layers of bread. And the trend I've noticed is that the younger generations like a higher carb version of that sandwich where they need kind of more positive reinforcement for every piece of like critical or constructive feedback. And I'm curious what trends you've seen there.
Okay, so you and I now are like no offense to you, but like we're old enough together now that like we're kind of like crusty old men on this a little bit. Totally. We're like, oh, the younger generation, this and that. And look, the truth is, whatever criticism you or I have about the new generation has been the same criticism that every set of like 30 or 40-year-old men have had about the next generation for like 1,000 years, right? So the young people don't want to work, like they, think that they should get advanced too quickly. They want promotions, all blah, blah, blah. And so that's been the criticism of every younger generation. What I've learned is I think that there's a level where you can take someone that is kind of like in that situation where they need like constant carbs, to use your phrase, which I really like. I'm gonna steal that. And you could just tell them like, we're going to do a limited amount of that here and just set that expectation. Like what I've found is when I've, like talked to people, like talk to managers that are like in HR and like huge companies, and they have these like elaborate training programs to like adjust everything so it's like exactly right for Gen Z or whatever. I think large companies can afford to do that kind of thing. And I run small businesses and like I just can't, right? So I set those expectations, right? And so I'll tell people like whatever age they are, it's like, this is kind of how we run things here. And if it's a great fit, then great. And if it's not a great fit, like let's just like know that up front. And it's possible to go to a place that has, more of those like training resources, I guess.
I love that. And I think, you mentioned the business size, and that's something I thought about there, where yes, the large businesses have the resources to put into it. But I also think maybe they have the need because they need to hire at much larger volumes than you do. And maybe if you plant your flag in terms of like who's going to be attracted to it, there's enough folks, even from the younger generations, that believe in your style of working, and you don't need to hire an army for the size of business. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Like if I need to hire 1,000 people, I need to set different standards, but I just need to find like 2.
So let's go back to the book, because I feel like there's such a wealth of knowledge from folks who have experienced such very unique lives in terms of founders, especially founders who've gotten to exit and had some level of success in between there. What are some trends that you noticed that maybe have been counterintuitive or surprising to you as it came about?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that I think stand out. One of them is how much happier founders were when they started planning for their life after exit, like well before the exit process. Because what I learned, this is my experience too, is that, you get an offer to exit. And then like once that starts, it's kind of like rolling a boulder downhill, right? Like there's no way to stop like the exit process until it kind of gets to the bottom. And so, for me, I got to my exit, I got the money, like whatever, I got out of the business, and just like had not had really thought in a systematic way about what do I actually want to do with the rest of my life? And like, how does the exit fit into that? So I really love to talk to founders who are like in the process now of building their business to think, the business that you're in now is a part of your life. Like we're going to run it for a certain span. At some point you won't run it, right? Something will happen. And so it's really important to think about what does your entire life look like, even after you're out of your business.
And you can argue that, founders are maybe in a position to have to make that decision sooner than others, but we're all kind of eventually going to be in that place, even if we're employees, of what do we do after we're not kind of working at this corporate job anymore.
Yeah.
And having a line of sight back from that probably de-risk what we spend our time on today so that we can compound towards that thing. And so what's kind of maybe the short version of the advice there for folks who are maybe more in the middle of their careers, maybe similar age to us, where we're going to be working for, in one capacity or another for another decade or two, that we kind of do it in a way that's going to feel most fulfilling?
So I'll tell a story about, a guy who was in the book, and his first business, like his big business, was in like IT consulting. And ultimately he got, had a large consulting company, kind of similar, I think, maybe to some of the things that you've done, but this was 15 years ago. Sold it to, I think, HP, which probably tells you when, like roughly when that world was. And then kind of like didn't do anything for work for like 8 or 9 years, and just like raised his kids. Like he talked about how like every morning, like a couple of the parents at his kids' school would just like chill out at Pete's Coffee and like have coffee. And like, he loved that. And then eventually he goes to this like trade show for knives and watches, like pocket knives. And he meets these guys from, I think, Denmark or like Sweden or something like that. And they make this awesome knife. And he starts talking to them, and it's like, yeah, we sell our knives to this big knife company, and like we get, some percentage of it or whatever. He's like, you guys make like the best knives then in this whole show. And so he puts this company together with these guys, and, they start making pocket knives, and now it's getting big. Like they're Inc. 500 now, but the point is not that they're Inc. 500. Not that it is a good business, but that's not the point. The point is, this guy has loved pocket knives for his entire life. Like since he was a kid, he collected pocket knives, like all throughout his adult life. Like let's, go to the Blade show and see what the best pocket knife is. And so he has this life now where like the stuff that he's doing is totally aligned with his vision for what he's interested in and what he wants his life to be. in a way that, IT consulting services for him was like not that. So I love that example because, so many founders get out of their business and say, oh, I'm just going to start another business right away. Because that's what I do. Like, that's who I am. And many of them are unhappy with that because they find themselves like back in the grind where like, they're flying out to their pitch meeting in Cleveland or whatever. And like, they get to the Cleveland airport and they're like, why the hell am I here? Like, I don't need money. Why am I away from my family? Like tearing up my health to go sell, some consulting project or something that I don't care about. So it's really about finding alignment between, what do you want your life to be once you don't need any more money? And then actually like figuring out like, how do you make that happen? And it may be another business, but it may not be.
And you've done a ton of stuff since your exit, and you're at Perceptual. It's your new baby that you've been doing for a couple of years. And I think it's super relevant in terms of how you're giving more folks confidence around using AI and changing their own lives, but doing it, overcoming some of their biggest restrictions, I think, or constraints around safety, privacy, and what could go wrong. And so tell us a little bit about how that started and any major takeaways that you have for folks who are on the fence about using AI and how to do it safely.
Yeah, sure thing. So we started this in 2023, and it's kind of the way I've been describing with it. Like sometimes I would work on it full time. Sometimes I put it aside. Like I put it aside to write the book for a little while. And that's like, again, like that's like the post-exit founder privilege that I think more of us should use and like think hard about is like, you don't have to grind if you don't want to, like grind when you want to. But I put it together because I saw there was going to be a need for more regulatory compliance work in the world of AI. And I was really interested in that question. I'm not even really sure why. But when ChatGPT came out, just like everybody in the world, like I'm interested in it, learning about it. And I saw like, well, there's going to be downsides and there's going to need to be organizations that help people mitigate it. So the work that we do now is in AI governance, consulting, and SaaS solutions, as well as AI safety training, mostly for like significant enterprise organizations. And it's a ton of fun.
I think, like I mentioned, really important work. A lot of the work we did in the enterprise and why enterprises tend to fail at big waves like cloud and mobile is because governance and because they have a lot to lose. And so risk is a bigger concern than startups who can emulate them and surpass them. So any major kind of nuggets or takeaways of things that you've realized over time that are really critical that people don't tend to know?
Yeah, I'll share this brief story. So we got a call from a large home healthcare organization, and they're sharing with me this story where they had, this nurse who would go into people's homes, and she'd been working for them for like 15, 20 years. English was not her first language. So she would always write her notes, and the notes were kind of like really short, kind of like broken English, like you would expect from someone who, English was not their first language. And then like one day, this was last year, like she starts to submit these notes that are in this like kind of like flowing Victorian prose with the M dashes and like all that, right? And so it's like very clearly she's like putting patient data in ChatGPT. And so they're like, oh my God, like this is like an obvious HIPAA violation. We need to get this figured out, how to prevent it, which is all true, right? But they had just not really thought to tell the people in the organization like, hey, you can't use AI this way. So a lot of the work that we do is helping organizations figure out, your employees are using AI for their work, like whether you like it or not, like how do you put the right guardrails around that with governance and training to make it work out for everybody. So that's kind of the work that we do.
Sweet. Well, some of the things that I like to ask all the guests here, since a lot of what we talk about is building engaged teams who ship delightful products, are around your favorite teams and your favorite products. So if when you're building a new team or giving advice, we usually have some kind of North Star of a team that we want to try and go back to or emulate. And I'm curious if there's kind of that inspirational team that you've either been on or you've heard of that you tried to model.
Yeah, so I'll tell you this story of my sales team in my last business. This was probably 2015, 2016, where we'd had good management in there for a couple of years. And I would always go to the sales meeting. So I had a sales manager, and I would attend the sales meeting with her and give my comments or whatever. And one day she calls me, and she's like, "Why are you coming to my sales meetings?" I was like, "Well, I've always come to sales meetings." She's like, "Am I hitting my numbers?" Like, "Yeah, your team's hitting their numbers." And she's like, "Well, then why are you here?" And I was like, "Oh my God, like that's an amazing lesson. Like, not only A, do I not need to go to that team, B, like my presence there is actually a disruption to this team that's actually functioning well. So when I build teams, like that's what I'm looking for. Like I want a leader who knows the numbers, and if she meets the numbers, she's like, just leave me alone, because I'm very happy now to leave my teams alone.
Amazing. I love that. And what about products? Is there a product that you unboxed or a service that you experienced recently that just really delighted you?
So yesterday I had to install a toilet seat, which is like not a sexy thing. Well, I had a toilet seat break. And so I ordered this toilet seat from Amazon, and like I go to install it. And so I'm not like a handy guy, but I get like my little screwdriver out of my little toolbox that I have. I go install this toilet, and it's like perfect, right? It's like hard. It's like a rock installed on there. Like it looks great. And I felt like such a hero being able to do that. So I just love the experience that they created of like creating like the pro plumber experience for me, who like can barely use the screwdriver.
This might be the first time that we've recommended a toilet seat on the show. Do you remember the name or anything?
I'll look it up. You can put it in the show notes for anyone who needs.
We'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, speaking of show notes, whether it's around your post-exit journey and the book Beyond the Exit, or maybe folks in the enterprise that are looking to really give their teams the power of AI, but do it in a safe way that they can feel confident, what is the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Totally. So if anyone's interested in AI governance and training, you'll see in the show notes, perceptual.com. Love to have you jump on there. And then I'll put my LinkedIn there as well. If anyone can reach out to me, every week I talk to 2 to 3 at least post-exit founders, and we just kind of chat, and I just love to hear from them. So I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for making time for us. This has been a delightful chat.
This is my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with John Rood. There were a few things that stood out to me that I'm going to be taking away from the episode. I hope that you get to take away to your own work as well. Here are 8 takeaways that I found particularly insightful. First was around testing and discovery. I love that story about spinning up a really simple Google ad and landing pages to validate the pre-med market out of all the options that he could go. You don't always need a McKinsey study or months of analysis. You don't always also want to be stuck in GPT internal paralysis. These quick, inexpensive tests can help you make decisions around uncertainty much faster than you expect. In today's world, founders, product teams, business owners have a lot of these same tools at their fingertips. Running ads, spinning up prototypes, or even maybe today testing with AI-generated mockups. The important thing that I implore you to remember is that tests help make decisions. Like in John's case, he already knew that he wanted to focus on a specific area out of all the things that they were doing, and Google Ads helped him decide which one. Be careful not to test for testing's sake without an underlying business decision that you have explicitly articulated first, and then having the test inform it. Secondly, on hiring, we got to talk about the balance of generalists and specialists, and also what it takes to convince someone to leave the stability of a big company to join a smaller, growing business. This tension is as real now as it was a decade ago. Companies more recently like Figma and Datadog have talked about pretty publicly about how they were able to scale by bringing on people who had already been there, done that, and at the same time, filtered for things like values and principles that matched the stage of their business and their culture at the time. Number 3, business operating systems. I loved hearing from John about how implementing EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System from the book Traction by Gino Wickman, and how it was transformational for him and his business. I've seen exactly the same at Integral, and how having a system of goals and accountability was especially valuable, especially during times like COVID, for example, when the ground kept shifting under us. It was easy to underestimate how powerful it can be to just follow the recipe and do EOS the EOS way. And I think companies that do, whether it's EOS or OKRs or any other system before making iterations to it, are the ones that can stay focused and also change direction quickly and also seamlessly across your entire organization when uncertainty hits, whether it's something like COVID or something more specific to your market and industry. Number 4, discovery. Similar to testing, I love how John figured out what he needed to know by simply going out there and asking people. I love that product market fit example using Google Ads, or how when he wanted to understand the content for his book, he just went out and interviewed 70 people. And I think this is a playbook we can all use, where we stop guessing and go have the conversations, go find the data, and don't overthink it. Start where you can, and then allow maybe your first set of interviews in your network to introduce you to more folks who can further help inform your product decisions, or in John's case, getting content for his book. Number 5, feedback. John reminded us that feedback really is a gift, and how some people want maybe the constant carbs, like he calls it, and others are fine with more direct notes. I think it's something that we focused on a lot at Integral. And on feedback, I'd say that a best practice we had was to provide it in a way that's early and often, and only then adjust to a cadence that works best for your teammates. And secondly, best practices around giving and receiving feedback. Something that we like to do and remember when we were giving feedback is to make sure that it was actionable so they can do something about it, specific so they remember the same time you were talking about, and kind. And when receiving feedback, we want to make sure that we're accepting and acknowledging the feedback. We're clarifying from the person so we can truly internalize where they're coming from, and never forgetting to thank them. It's uncomfortable to be candid, and showing appreciation to the person who is doing that uncomfortable thing, I think really de-risks that continuous feedback from your teammates, so you're never guessing. Number 6 was peer groups. John's experience with EO really mirrors what I've experienced in both YPO and Vistage, and how these communities really accelerate our learning because we get to see the same patterns show up across industries, across various roles, and feedback, accountability, and the shared stories that tend to happen in these very private groups really compounded my growth. I highly recommend finding a peer group that's suitable for your role, and make the investments, both in the time and in some case, if it's a paid organization, the money. And chances are, I imagine it'll be extremely worth it, like it has been for both John, myself, and countless other entrepreneurs. Number 7, there is life after retirement and more to you than your job, or after exit maybe even. And I love the find your pocket knife metaphor there from that one story he shared. And I think whether you're a founder or an employee, it's especially important in this new AI-driven world to really think about what passions and curiosities you want to align with in the long term. And if you think about it, it's easier than ever to build tools and start a company with all the infrastructure that's readily available to us. So doing that introspection and finding the passion will likely help you overcome the hard and tiring days, whether you're on a path of entrepreneurship or digital transformation or doing something major in your career. Finally, and number 8, AI. John made a really critical point that I agree with. Governance and guardrails are becoming more available, and enterprises don't need to let fear paralyze them from using AI quickly and effectively. The winners, I don't think, will be the ones who wait for perfect clarity and certainty. I think it's the ones who are going to place smart bets and learn how to move forward quickly while also doing it safely. I got a challenge for you, audience, and I think it's simple. Pick one of these areas, whether it's testing, hiring, business systems, product and customer discovery, feedback, peer groups, or planning your pocket knife future about your passion. What step can you take this week to have a better life and a better career? Hope you enjoyed the episode. We will be back next week with another one on fostering engaged teams who build delightful products. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.